Hey everyone, Sumo Spiffy here. It's been a while. I've been working on a couple videos, but they're not out yet for a few reasons. One, I started a new job as a substitute teacher, and the adjustment has been real. Most of the available jobs have been for middle schools, which, for those not in the US, is roughly 11 to 13-year-olds. Half of them are feral, and all of them are goblins. It's been exhausting. But it's also because of the subjects of those videos in progress. I have one about predictions that I decided makes more sense to release either just before the Banzuke comes out or just after, when people are actually, about to make some picks. And then I thought the suggestion of a video about Elder Stock had potential, but there's more to research than I expected. So I'm still working on that. The Basho's coming up though, and that means it's time to talk Banzuke. This is coming out a bit later than I'd hoped, but you still have a few days to put in an entry for Guess the Banzuke. Link in the description as always. If you saw the instant Banzuke, what I have here is essentially the same, but there are plenty of contentious points and alternatives worth discussing. Starting at the top, Oshoryu, he is the Yokozuna, Onosato, 12 wins, Ozeki 1 East, Kotozakura, 8 wins, Ozeki 1 West. Daisho, incumbent Sekiwake 1 East with a 9-6 record, he's gonna stay right there. And after that, we immediately get to talk about stuff. Now there's some discussion, I have seen certain people talking about the idea of Takayasu getting the spot at Sekiwake over Kirishima. And this is largely based on the math. If you do the math, Takayasu ends up pretty far ahead of Kirishima, so hey, maybe they give it to him on that. And it's not impossible, but I think that is pretty unlikely. There have been no instances in what I consider the most relevant age of Sumo, of Banzuke creation, which is from 2004 forward, where a Komusubi 1 East with an 8-7 record was denied a Sekiwake promotion in favor of someone from Maegashira. It's happened from like the other guy at Komusubi doing better, but not for someone from Maegashira. The last time that happened was in the 90s, and it happened 3 times. However, as we're going to see, these are some pretty specific circumstances. Tochino Waka was 8-7, he was not promoted, whereas Taka Hanada was promoted from Maegashira 2 to Sekiwake 1 West. But dude was 14-1 and won the Yusho, so he absolutely blew it out at a very high Maegashira rank. It was going to be very difficult to deny him a spot in Sekiwake, especially during this period where things were done differently and promotions to the Sanyaku were much easier to get, especially additional Sanyaku slots at Komusubi and Sekiwake. That was January 92. Here in July 93, again, Takatoriki. He was 8-7, he stayed at Komusubi 1 East, whereas Kota Nishiki was 12-3, but he was Maegashira 1 West, and he got thrown up into an extra Sekiwake slot. In fact, they had to put Kota Waka, who was 8-7 at Maegashira 2 West, up at Komusubi to fill it out because of this additional Sekiwake slot. So that is obviously quite a bit different than what we see these days. And the final example from January 96, Tosuna Umi, 8-7 at stayed at Komusubi 1 East. Takatoriki, he keeps showing up in these. He was 12-3 at Maegashira 1 East and also got a new Sekiwake slot. So what we're seeing is that even in the 90s, this only happened when guys were very high Maegashira with almost no room to go. Then they got bumped up to Sekiwake with these extremely good records. Takayasu, he obviously did great, he finished 12-3, but he did it from Maegashira 4. So going up from 4 to Komusubi, it's 4 ranks, obviously that doesn't feel like much at 12-3, but it's still a pretty decent jump. It means there's not nearly as much of a reason to feel like, man, he's getting kind of screwed, we should give him that extra bump up to Sekiwake. And of course, there's the modern counter-argument to things like that, which is from 2021, where Daisho was 13-2 at Maegashira 1 West, but all of the Sanyaku did really well, so no one was falling out, no one was moving out of those ranks. He only got a new Komusubi slot. Pretty clearly, if it had been the 90s, he would have gotten a new Sekiwake slot, but in this more recent example, he did not. There just is no good reason to think that Takayasu is going to get bumped to Sekiwake ahead of Kirishima. Is it possible? Absolutely. It does make sense, but given how they do things, it's not likely. Now let's go to what is probably a better question regarding the Sanyaku. Is Wakamoto Haru going to join his brother Wakatakakage at Komusubi? He was 9-6 at Maegashira 1 West, and even though it's not that uncommon for those guys to be moved just over to Maegashira 1 East, the Banzuke gets a little bit tighter further down, so, maybe there is a reason to give him that extra bump up. But I don't think it's going to happen. With respect to Kinbozan and Atami Fuji further down, I'll talk about them later, but there is a way to set up the Banzuke so that they don't get quite so screwed even if Wakamoto Haru stays at Maegashira. But also, if you bump Waka up to Komusubi 2 West, then you're going to bump Oho to 1 East, Abi to 1 West, probably, and that's okay. But then you're slightly over promoting Tamawashi, you're slightly under demoting Gonoyama, and while in a vacuum those moves are fine, I don't think the committee is going to be really thrilled about that idea. I definitely don't think they're going to see that as a good thing that makes it a positive for moving Wakamoto Haru up. They have very much tended to try and keep guys who are coming up from the mid ranks to just the promotion they should get, not more than that. And guys, especially 7 and 8, they have in many cases tried to make sure they get that 1 rank demotion. So if they can avoid screwing over Kinbo and Atami if they want to without moving Waka up, and also avoid making these moves that in the recent past they have tried to avoid, I think that's probably a good enough reason to leave Waka at 1 East. Again, could they move him up? Absolutely. Are you an idiot if you put him there? No, you're not. But I definitely think you are playing against the odds if you move him to Komusubi. He probably stays at Maegashira. One other thing I want to make note of, Abi at 6 and 9, Komusubi 1 West, he was mathematically behind Tamawashi and Gonoyama and Hiraumi, and I am putting him ahead of all 3 of them. I'm doing this because he was in the Sanyaku. He had to test some of the contenders, even though he wasn't doing very well, that made his life harder. And I think they're just going to put him ahead of those guys because they slot in nicely where they end up on this Banzuke you see in front of you. So Abi at Maegashira 2 East makes a lot of sense. But if you think it's a little too much to put him ahead of all 3 of those guys, the only question I would have is, if you're going to put him behind any of those guys, which ones are those going to be? And I'm not sure. I don't think there's a good answer to, well, he's only going to go behind Tamawashi. Well, why doesn't he go behind Gonoyama as well? Well, shouldn't he go behind Hiraumi at that point too? If you take him out of Maegashira 2 East, I don't think there's an obvious choice between 2 West, 3 East, and 3 West. So that's why I am going to keep him at 2 East. It's the most obvious answer, and there's no clear single alternative. Ura and Tobizaru. They were tied, which makes this a 50-50. Now, if you missed the instant Banzuke, the reason I have them like this is largely because of what happened a year ago. In that case, Ura was 6 and 9 at Maegashira 1 East, Oho was 7 and 8 at Maegashira 3 East, so mathematically they were tied. Oho was given priority, he only dropped the 1 rank, and Ura was over-demoted. For the exact same reason, I think Ura should probably just get the regular demotion, and Tobizaru will be the one to be over-demoted. Now, Hakuoho was also tied with these guys, but because Ura and Tobizaru were in the Joy, I would be shocked if he went above those 2. So I suspect this is the most obvious part of that 3-way tie. He's going to finish at Maegashira 7 East. It should really just be a question of who goes where at Maegashira 6. I think Ura is more likely to go to East, but it is mostly a coin flip. You could go either way and feel pretty decent about it. Similarly, Churinaumi and Onokatsu were tied. Now, Churinaumi I have ahead because they have tended to prefer the guys with the better records when they're coming up from further down, but hey, it's kind of a 50-50. I'd say it's more of a 60-40, but if you're seriously vibing on Onokatsu ending up ahead, you're not terribly wrong to do so. Understand that you're taking a bit of a risk given recent tendencies, and it's not a risk I want to take, but you're not wrong to do so. And now we get to the fun part. From technically Aonishiki down to Atami Fuji, this is kinda ugly, but it really revolves around 2 guys. As I mentioned before, Kinbozan and Atami Fuji. Now, the reason I said that they are not a good enough reason to put Wakamoto Haru at Komusubi is very simply this. Look at how these guys have finished. Now, if you're going purely with math, Midori and Aonishiki were tied, Kinbozan and Meisei were tied, Shodai was by himself, Endo and Shishi were tied, and Atami was a half a rank behind them. And they all have their differing promotions or demotions. Midori's got +2 on 9 and 6, Meisei's got 1.5 on 9 and 6, Shishi's got +2 on 9 and 6. Right now, Kinbozan is -4 on 6 and 9, Shodai is -3.5, Atami is -4. So they're all going a different distance even with the same records. And again, the math says that's correct, but if they don't want to do -4s, if they're like, look it, we don't mind over demoting guys, but a full rank, especially at 6 and 9, -4 on 6 and 9 is significant. Look what happens if we swap Kinbo and Midori and Shishi and Atami. Now you've got 9 and 6 going up a rank and a half, a rank and a half, and a rank and a half. You've got 6 and 9s going down 3.5, 3.5, and 3.5. And Endo, who is 7 and 8, goes down a rank and a half, so he is also over demoted by a half a rank. Now, this is crucial. This looks very, very good symmetrically, artistically, it just looks very nice, but that is not a reason that the committee tends to use to make these moves. They have shown no compulsion about keeping guys together just because they have similar records, a similar rank, or the same records, it ranks next to each other, or anything like that. If guys need to move apart from each other, even though they had the same performance, they'll do that. That is absolutely fine to them. However, I think this situation is different. Last July, Nishiki Fuji pretty famously was not demoted at all from Maegashira 17 East. This blew people's minds because he looked like he was a shoo-in to end up in Juryo with that record at that rank. It was an unbelievably abnormal decision, and I maintain that they would not have done it if not for the fact that Hokuto Fuji got the same treatment. I do not think that they are going to do something that out of line with the normal methods unless they can do it to 2 guys, not just 1. Which means because Atami Fuji and Kinbozan are both affected by this, they might actually get over demoted that full rank because they'd be doing it to 2 guys, not just 1. That is genuinely, I believe, the main reason why the -4 is still in play as an option. But of course, if you look at this Banzuke and you don't know the math, you don't know the math part exists, this looks perfect. -3.5, +1.5. All these guys are moving the same distance on the same records, all in the same cluster. It looks great. It looks like exactly what a Banzuke should do. So which direction is the committee gonna go? I genuinely don't know. This is the one part of this. I know I've said in the past that what I like to do is give my official guess the Banzuke prediction, like the channel's official guess for what this is gonna look like when I make this video, but I do not have this decided yet. I have no clue which way they're gonna go. I'm probably gonna spend all weekend thinking about it and turn my entry in just before the deadline. This one is tough. This one is gonna take some thought. And what makes this especially problematic is the fact that, okay, if you get Kinbozan and Midori wrong, like if you flip them or don't flip them and it goes the other way, you still get points for that for Guess the Banzuke. But at Atami and Shishi, you get no points if you're wrong there. Now, could they do something really wacky and start shuffling guys around even more? Even though this looks like a totally screwed up situation where they might do something completely out of pocket, I'm not really sure there are that many options. Maybe you end up with Kinbozan at Maegashira 8 West, so he only gets his -3, and then he's ahead of Aonishiki and Midori Fuji. I imagine if they don't put Kinbo and Atami at either -4, -3.5, this is the most likely alternative. The committee could end up feeling that even though Kinbozan didn't really end up with a Joy schedule and they may not feel compelled to protect him in any way, they might think, you know what, we don't want to go -4, but it's also weird to only move him ahead of Midori Fuji and not Aonishiki. That would be the logic behind that alternative. Atami Fuji's gonna be over demoted. There's really no way around that, because if they put him ahead of both Endo and Shishi, Endo's going down -2 and they're definitely not doing that to him. So it's really either Atami stays at -4 or he switches with Shishi and only goes down 3.5. If Kinbozan doesn't go down -4, whether it's -3 or -3.5, I am 99% sure Atami only goes down 3.5. Especially if Kinbo only goes down 3, I can't imagine they would make Atami then go down 4. That just seems really, really unlikely. But right now, it looks like your two choices are Kinbozan to 9 east, Midori Fuji 9 west, Atami Fuji 11 west, Shishi 12 east, or you flip-flop Atami and Shishi and Midori and Kinbozan. If you made me pick right now, I'm going to go with the smaller demotion. I'm going to go with the -3.5, but I am not convinced yet. Like I said, I am going to have to give this a lot of thought. And then we get to the Juryo promotions, and these are always weird. There's always some flexibility in there. Now, I think it's pretty clear that Roga, even though mathematically he was ahead of Sada no Umi and Kota Shoho, it's very likely he ends up behind those two. If you put him ahead, then they're still both getting over promoted, and they're getting over promoted with 8 and 7 records, which in the recent past, the committee has seemed to try and really mute those 8 and 7 over promotions, so I guess that's a rationale for it. But if there's an alternative, I think it's most likely this. Sada no Umi and Kota Shoho both go up +2. I could see the committee deciding that Kota Shoho going up 2.5 is too much, but I'd be kind of surprised if they put Roga ahead of both of them. I think it's more likely Roga at 14 west, with the main alternative being Roga at 14 east, Sada no Umi at 13 west either way. Ryuden and Shona no Umi should stay ahead of all the guys coming up from Juryo. I realize only -1 on 6 and 9 kind of sucks, but Kaio was only slightly ahead of Ryuden and Shona no Umi mathematically, and Tamashoho and Tochi Taikai were either tied or behind. So Tamashoho and Tochi Taikai are definitely going to be behind Ryuden and Shona anyway. So I would be surprised if they decide to over-promote Kaio, because even here at Maegashira 16 East, that is a slight over-promotion. Mathematically, he only was at 16 West. Bumping him up further to move Ryuden and Shona no Umi down, they would have to really feel like those two guys need to get bumped back for real. It is not impossible. Like so many things, it could happen. But given how they tend to treat the Juryo guys coming up, and especially because Chura no Umi finished ahead of Aonishiki last time, despite Aonishiki being mathematically 2.5 ranks ahead of Chura, I don't think Kaio only being a half rank ahead of Ryuden and a full rank ahead of Shona is going to give him any kind of an edge. He should be behind those two guys. If there is a good question here, it's probably what do they do with Nishikigi and Asakoryu? These are almost certainly going to be the two guys saved from demotion to Juryo. Problem is, if you do anything with them in terms of moving them up, you end up with Asakoryu getting not much of a demotion. If you bump Kaio and Tamashoho and Tochi Taikai down, well, if you move Asakoryu ahead of Nishikigi, and I kept him ahead because he had the better record, he gets no demotion, so that's not going to happen. If you put him at 16 West, he only gets half a rank, and Nishikigi goes ahead of him, again, not what they've been doing, and gets a pretty noticeable under demotion. Also, and more importantly in my view, these guys who earned their rank in Makuuchi are ending up behind guys who should have fallen to Juryo, except that there weren't enough guys to fill out the top division. And even putting Kaio at 16 East, but putting them ahead of the other two doesn't seem to make a lot of sense for the reasons I just described. I think you do end up with Nishikigi at the bottom, Asakoryu at 17 West, and the rest of the Juryo guys ahead of him. Alright, so that is, well, just about our official Banzuke prediction for Natsu 2025. Like I said, I'm still debating what to do with Kinbozan and Atami Fuji, and again, like I said, I will probably spend all weekend mulling it over. Just remember, if you're entering Guess the Banzuke, the deadline for this basho is back to the usual Monday at 6 p.m. GMT. Fellow Americans, unless you don't have much to do Monday morning, you're probably better off turning it in by Sunday night. I'm being extra clear about this, not just for the community as a whole, but because we had over 100 new players last time. That was fantastic, and I want to make sure as few people as possible who want to play miss out, because the last basho made them think they had an extra day. The prediction skills video will probably be the next video I put out just before the release of the Banzuke. Now, I dug into some numbers and I found a legitimately useful prediction method that's been sitting there for a while. I just didn't realize it. I feel pretty good it's going to help me in the future, and it can probably help a lot of you as well. So keep an eye out for that. Have a great day, and I will see you soon.